Hi, I'm Alison Weissbrot. I'm the editor of Campaign US, and I'm here with Lauren Douglas, SVP of Marketing at Channel Factory. And we are going to discuss everything you missed at CES and give you a peek into 2023. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Allison.
How are you? Fresh off the plane from Vegas.
That's right. Just recovering.
Yeah. So tell me, how was CES 2023?
CES 2023 was interesting. It was certainly smaller than what I've seen in the past. So it's been 2 years basically since we had the last CES. And I think that was about 200,000 people. And this year was about 100. So definitely felt a little bit more downscaled, but there was still a lot of excitement, energy, enthusiasm, and people sort of milling about, shilling their cool ideas.
Yeah. Did you find that? I know probably a lot of like international people maybe didn't make the trip out. Yeah. Did you feel like there was mostly a U.S. presence?
Yes.
Yeah.
I did definitely feel it was more U.S. this year. I think potentially there was some impact with not only how close it was to the holidays, but also the fact that it was a weekend, and also the fact that there are still lockdowns going on in some parts of the world, and in particular in China. So I do think that the international crowd might have played a part this year.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that the energy is slowly creeping back up after 2 years of virtual, right?
I will say the people that were there were happy to be there and excited to be there. There certainly was a lot of energy.
Yeah. And what about in the advertising industry scene?
Yeah.
In the area, the Cosmo, where all of us folks hang out.
That's right. I think there was a smaller presence. I heard from a lot of people that agencies certainly scaled back their presence this year. There were still brand marketers there. There was less in the sort of agency takeovers, taking over a big space and doing a lot of content. That was dialed back for sure. But I think that it was much more, the tone was smaller meetings, everybody standing in the lobby with their signs for whatever advertising agency or company they're with.
I know that scene well.
That's right. So I think there was a lot more of that. Smaller meetings, closed door meetings, and, less of the sort of big parties and big content and speaking sessions.
Yeah, I know that, the economic outlook and the recession kind of colored a lot of the conversations that took place at CES. Did you feel like that scaling back had to do with the economy? Like, what do you sort of think was the driver of that?
I do. I think that it's a lot of the big tech players are facing tough economic headwinds. A lot of their stocks are off and are at 52-week lows. And I think that certainly changed people's calculus when it came to making decisions about how much to invest. I also think that when you have layoff news, it's hard to be like, and by the way, come to my party. So I do think that it was scaled back a bit because of that. A lot of what I spoke to people about was, what is the impact going to be on consumers? Like, if consumer spending is down, if we go into a recessionary environment in 2023, how does that impact you as a marketer, you as an advertising agency leader? And so that was some of the interesting conversations that I had, on the ground there.
Yeah. So what were some of the insights you got from those conversations?
Yeah. I mean, I think people said that, certainly performance marketing is going to be key this year. Understanding where the ROI comes in, understanding, driving CPAs, CPC, et cetera. So how are people actually going to be able to tie back their marketing investment to the dollars invested? So I think there may just be a shift a little bit more from the brand marketing side of the world to more of the sort of, programmatic side.
Yeah, it makes sense because marketers want everything to be measurable, right? Yeah. Especially in a time when they're fighting for their budgets.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a risk that the industry will pull back from brand too much?
I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope not. There have been some studies in the past where I believe Taco Bell was one of them we've talked about before, but when others have dialed down in a recessionary environment, brands that dial up their brand marketing actually have a huge lift because they're seen versus a less competitive environment. So I do think that it will be interesting to see who pulls back and who actually, invests more.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to tell, right?
Yeah, totally.
Who does well. So let's talk about some of the tech that was on show at CES. Obviously, the show floor is known for having tons of different gadgets and futuristic things that look like maybe they could never be viable in the real world. But it also has some pretty cool stuff. So first of all, what did you see just personally that was impressive to you? And then maybe from a marketer perspective, what did you see that could have real implications?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what I heard from people was around the smart health realm. So there was a toilet that reads your pee and sends you statistics based on what you've just peed out, which is always
Sounds convenient.
Yeah. But there was also, you know, for deaf people, glasses that will read the text of people's lips as they're speaking to you. It will read text out to you, so you can actually know what people are saying. So I think there was a lot around how to be more inclusive of other abled people, which was really interesting. There was a wheelchair that could climb stairs, and so I think some of the smart health stuff and sort of expanding, abilities for all different types of people was really interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And accessibility and inclusivity are all things that marketers want to do more of, right?
Definitely. But then there were some interesting consumer products for sure. So I saw that L'Oreal is launching I don't know if you saw this, but they're launching an eyebrow tool that's, I think, basically will draw your eyebrows on for you.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like you walk the show floor and you're like, some of these things, do we need them or do we? But accessibility, again, I'm sure some people can't draw their eyebrows on.
Totally. And also some people just might be bad at it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We need all the help we can get.
That's right.
So one of the things that the industry has been buzzing about nonstop that my inbox is flooded with pitches is AI, ChatGPT, Lensa, DALL-E 2, you name it. I heard that AI was not as big of a presence on the show floor itself. Talk about that. Like reconcile all the excitement and buzz around it and the lack of it showing up at CES.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I do think that there is a ton of buzz around ChatGPT and DALL-E. DALL-E is part of ChatGPT, I believe, which can actually like create imagery and create art and music and things like that. So there was definitely a lot of talk around that. Like, what is the role of creativity and humans with computers? I don't think anyone has the answer to that question, but it certainly is interesting to watch. But then, we were talking about ChatGPT as a writer, if you can write your own articles, if you could write term papers using these tools, like how does that work? Does that actually work? Can we, and does it negatively impact fields like journalism? It's interesting.
I mean, until ChatGPT can do a vodcast, I think I'm okay.
That's right. I think so. But also it sounds weird. It sounds like a person who doesn't necessarily speak English is trying to speak English when you listen to some of the ChatGPT or read some of what it's written.
It's interesting. I was playing around with it for a piece I was writing, and I popped in a couple of questions like create a marketing idea for Chipotle. And it was like pretty solid place to start. Like
it is, yeah.
But it's lacking that humanity that you need when you're like reading a piece of whatever you're reading, watching something. Like you want those little human errors is what makes it so good, I think. So I think there's definitely implications with AI, but very much to be seen. Like, I don't think all the writers or all the creatives are going away tomorrow. So.
No, I don't think so either. I think it's interesting, when you're writing a story, I'm sure one of the things that a journalist does is take something that could have been 40 words and make it 20 words.
Yep.
And I think there's an art to that. And when you're retelling a story, yeah, exactly. When you're telling a story to somebody, like synthesizing information and cutting it down is what humans do. And I don't know that AI has solved that yet. Maybe it will. And maybe it will just continue to get better and better and become sentient. Who knows?
Yeah. Did you get any sense from, did you get any sense from people on the ground about like how they are going to use these types of tools and where they see potential?
No. Yeah. I mean, I asked the question to people, but I think that it's all still a kind of a question mark. Nobody knows exactly what that's going to look like. I think brands are talking about it, but I don't think people were just sort of like, yeah, we're watching it. We're watching for it, but like, we're not really sure if this is actually applicable to our business.
That makes sense. It's too early to tell. Like the metaverse. Well, good segue. So one other topic that I think we're all kind of sick of at this point is the metaverse. Yeah. Which was huge last year. Everyone was talking about metaverse and Web3. Obviously, will have massive implications for the way that we do business and live our lives. But did you see much talk about that at CES?
Yeah, I think brands were certainly talking about it, but it was more applicable to everyday sort of life. So I think it was less you're going to have this avatar that has a whole second life and is going to live in this other realm, and here's how you're going to interact with our brand. And it was probably more like, here's some actual things that you could do today. So one example was IBM has a weather functionality, and they're potentially thinking of selling. So you could actually take a photo of the sky, and then you can see what the weather is going to look like in the next few hours.
Wow.
So you could see if there's a storm coming, or do you need to bring your umbrella, whatever. And then they're going to try to sell ads on top of that. So yes, if there's a storm coming, maybe Campbell's is going to sell you a soup ad. Or maybe if it's really sunny, a sunscreen company is going to sell you a sunscreen, buy a sunscreen ad against that. So I think it was more applicable versions of VR and AR instead of, talking necessarily about your character in the metaverse and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I think I hear the same thing, that everyone sort of has a lot of hope for the potential of AR and like integrating sort of these digital overlays into our lives. But I don't know that like we're all going to be living in Oculus or whatever they call now, MetaQuest headsets in the next 3 years.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So sustainability was also a really big topic at the show. There were numerous announcements with Scope 3 partnering with publishers on media decarbonization. I'm sure there was tons of stuff on the floor related to sustainability. Did you see that coming up a lot in conversation?
I didn't actually, but I'm happy to talk about sustainability. I just I didn't hear that as a big theme. But like, what are you hearing?
Well, I hear mostly I thought media decarbonization was a really big area that came up a lot, which personally, like as the skeptic that I am, I feel like needs a little more investigating, right? Like, how are we calculating these things? What are the standards before we all kind of go all in and say like, yeah, we're great, we're decarbonizing media?
I did speak with somebody who runs diversity and inclusivity and sustainability at one of the agencies. And what she was saying is that they are looking at this, and at the same time, they're building in the standards so that they can really understand like, okay, great. It sounds good that we've decarbonized, or it sounds good that we've saved X amount of, our carbon footprint. However, if we have no way to measure it, then it's kind of worthless. Yeah. So I think that at least, the agencies that are working on this at an agency-wide level are trying to come up with those two things hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think you're right. It's like decarbonization without any sort of like metric or what does this actually mean is sort of useless.
Building the plane while we're flying it. We kind of have to. Yeah. Like, time's running out, right?
Totally.
And it also kind of just goes to show you how big of a conference CES is. Yeah. That like, you can pick up totally different themes from being there and like not even see half the show, right?
Yeah.
Like,
did you hear about sustainability in terms of like the consumer electronics side? Because that I also didn't really.
Not as much. Okay. I think accessibility. And I think there was some stuff on the floor from what I've heard that was more sustainability focused, but I think mostly accessibility was bigger, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
So CES this year happened also in the context of the government, right? Cracking down on a lot of big tech companies. Do you feel like that could have potentially shaped the way that they showed up at the event?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, especially in Europe. I think they're doing a lot in Europe on, in fact, they just, slapped Facebook with a pretty big fine.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be more and more of a conversation, what kind of regulation they're going to put in place. Is there going to be any kind of federal regulation rather than it being state by state as it is with California and the CCPA? We'll see. I think that remains to be seen. As we saw last week, like the government doesn't seem to be functioning super well right now. So
to put it mildly.
Right. So I don't know how much regulation we'll see coming down the pike, but I certainly think that tech companies are looking out for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading a piece about like how privacy is so top of mind for these tech companies, but then there were so many gadgets out there that require collecting like personal health data, like all these different health things you're talking about. What happens to the data about your pee that went in the smart toilet.
Exactly.
That's sensitive health information.
Absolutely. Or imagine if somebody got a hold of, you're wearing some sort of wearable device and, you are shaking and your health care provider gets a hold of that information and suddenly that becomes some sort of a pre-existing condition, right? Like, I think that's a really interesting conversation to have around all these smart health devices is like, how do you make sure that like consumers are protected and that their sensitive information and data isn't going wherever, they don't want it to go.
Totally. What did you see from the automakers in terms of their EV push?
Yeah, I mean, definitely every single automaker had some sort of an EV push. I thought that was, it's really great that we're all talking EVs now. And I think obviously Tesla has sort of led the way, but now all of the auto manufacturers are getting involved. I thought some of the Amazon actually had an interesting, they're doing some interesting stuff with dashboard cams. So they recording, from your auto's dashboards that you can see if there was an accident. Even if somebody sort of approaches your car, the car can turn on the dash cam to, even if you're not around. And then there's a lot of like theft of, parts of cars going on in certain,
I've heard about that.
Yeah. And so this could potentially help that too. So I thought that was interesting from like an Amazon integrating with Alexa into your car potentially. And then, absolutely. All of the EV, sort of, I think that all of these manufacturers are assuming that we're going to be, mostly EVs in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think they have to, right?
Totally.
Due to like regulations.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Alexa. Last time I was at CES was a few years ago. Obviously the show was virtual for a couple of years, but I remember voice was everywhere. Like, okay, Google integrated into everything. Is that sort of like old news now? Was that a big thing? I
didn't hear a ton about, no pun intended. I didn't hear a ton about voice, but maybe it is just everywhere now.
Yeah.
I don't know. My parents haven't fully like integrated voice home. And so you can't do anything
Well, that's how you know it's mainstream.
Right. That's right.
What's the strangest piece of technology you heard about or saw at CES?
I mean, I think it would probably be the toilet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, what do you sort of think about, like, how do you see the future of kind of CES evolving? Do you think it's going to be back in full force next year or?
No, I think that the idea of tent poles are going to be smaller and potentially more niche in the future. We were actually having a conversation at CES about niche is the new mass, with TikTok sort of giving you access to all of the different things and different facets of yourself that you might be interested in. I think that that's going to become ubiquitous in business as well. And so these giant trade shows with 200,000 people are going to be just smaller. And I think people will still go to them. But there will probably be more events that are more niche. And I do think that in 2023 in particular, there may be a pulling back of budgets spent on this type of thing. I've already started hearing from friends of mine who are also marketers who are saying, yeah, we're going to dial back spending on this. We're going to dial back spending here and there. So I think that, we'll see what 2023, 2024 has to offer, but I do think things will be just a bit more dialed back.
Yeah, I'm interested in the niche element, right? Like, how do these events become more like tailored to the specific groups that come to them? I think it's interesting. It's like we're just sort of emerging from this pandemic and the dust hasn't settled yet.
I agree.
There will be like major changes to the way that we show up at these events.
Yeah, and probably new things that pop up, new creations, new events, new conversations that people want to have that are not just sort of the way we've always done things, which I think is healthy. Things have to die and things have to grow. So we'll see what the impact is. But I think you're right that the dust hasn't totally settled yet.
Yeah. So as a marketer and for all the marketers listening, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from your few days at CES?
People are thinking about and concerned about the potential impacts from a recession. However, I would say most people felt very optimistic that it would help help their creativity. It would help their strategies because they're going to have to learn to pivot. They're going to have to be more creative. And I think sometimes operating in an environment where you have to pivot and you have to be creative and there are fences put around you, sometimes that's where like the most interesting ideas come from.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of optimism.
Yeah. You can't think outside the box if there's no box.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So I think that would be one of the key themes is, what is this recession going to look like from a marketing perspective? And
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And everyone's kind of scenario planning and all that fun stuff. But
totally. And it will be interesting to see, like we said before, who takes off, who decides to take a bigger share of voice, potentially at a discount because, they can do it right now when they might not have been able to do it a year ago.
Yeah. It's going to be all about being quick and smart and scrappy.
Totally.
Awesome. All right, Lauren. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm glad we got to chat about CES.
Yes. And that's everything that you need to know from CES 2023.